Hello, welcome everybody. We have a very special guest with us today. This is Blaine Andrusek.
AKA Blaine the Herb Man.
That's right, Blaine the Herb Man.
A lot of people think I died. I've been standing in line at places and somebody's talking to somebody else and they say they ran into me on the street and had to actually poke me because they heard, I've heard about 5 different ways that I died, none of which were related. And I would just find some of them comical.
Right.
You know, because they were about as far from anything to do with reality as could be.
Yeah.
But no, I'm still here. I think in the old days I suffered what they would have called a nervous breakdown. Working 12-hour days for weeks on end without a break might have been okay in my 20s, but working hours like that when you're in your 60s just doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
And so I had been given some warnings where I started having a few anxiety attacks, but I knew they were anxiety attacks. I wasn't having a heart attack. I've coached and helped people with anxiety attacks, and I knew what to do, so I did. A lot of people might have called 911 because they thought they were having a heart attack, but I said, no, this is an anxiety attack, and I used a few oils and a few herbs, and then I just lay back and relax for a minute and kind of, okay, no, I'm fine. But I'd have a couple a year, and they seemed to be getting a little stronger, and I just didn't listen to the message there that I had to cut back on my work hours. Mm-hmm. But my business was growing, and I could have, and maybe should have, hired some help, but I'd had a number of friends in home businesses, small businesses, tell me about all the problems they had with staff, and that it occurred to me that managing the staff was going to be more stressful than just getting all the work done myself. So I did have elves. I always called them elves.
Yeah.
And they were usually former students that would want to come and work with me just to keep picking my head and keep learning. And so some of my former students have become lifelong friends. I mean, that's how I met Malcolm originally. And I've got piles of people out there that we've gone fishing together, camping together, whatever.
Yeah.
And
yeah, there was many of them that reached out even the last time that we had connected. Colleen Emery and
right.
Amanda Spicer, like, oh
and
my gosh,
and I look
Blaine.
at Colleen and what she's achieved. What a remarkably successful business, and I don't know how many people she has on staff now, but it's a major business going on there.
Yeah.
You know? So I can take some pride in. There's been a few people that just meeting me and being inspired enough from even things like teaching Herb 1 for Wild Rose. I had people that were so inspired that they went on to become naturopaths.
Right.
That's a big commitment.
That's amazing.
But it started out with just some inspiration for me as to how it works with working with natural medicines and the difference between, I've always, I don't know, some of it may just be because I'm a Libra astrologically, but seeking balance. It annoyed me even when I was studying herbology initially that some of us hippy-dippy types would be condemning Western standard practice medicine as evil in some way, and then there'd be standard practice people that thought all of these head in the breeze, flowers in the sky, people were just messing around with stuff they had no right to be doing.
Right.
And I was always trying to get people to just put your swords down and understand we need to work together.
Yeah, and you've always been really good at bridging those two worlds, haven't you?
Yeah, and it's a growing field now in cities all over. I noticed that in Toronto recently, they've got a whole ward in one of their biggest hospitals where they're working with, for all sorts of reasons, even just anxiety attacks, migraine headaches, etc., where they're even working with things like LSD now in the hospital,
right?
And magic mushrooms and things like that. So those weren't things I used in my practice ever, but it's so. I remember when my mother was in hospital following a heart attack, and my wife at the time was teaching Reiki and whatnot, and everybody else had gone home for the night, and she was the one on for the night. This was at the Foothills CICU, and it's sort of set up like a space station. So there's just one nurse on for the night, and she's got monitors on all of the rooms around her. And she came to the door. Jennifer was standing there doing Reiki on her, and she looked at me. I was feeling sad. My mother might be dying here. I was almost crying in a corner of the room. And she looked at me and said, "You could be doing this too." And I thought, well, I'm not trained in Reiki, but I get the concept, so I'll do what I can. And there was just, the door opened very quietly, about 4 inches, and this nurse looked in and she said, "Whatever you guys are doing in here, keep doing it." You know, and it was so cool to be doing something like Reiki, where you might imagine you're doing this person some good, but we're hooked up to somebody here with full monitors.
Right.
And as we started working, and I'm hearing little beeps and looking at the monitors and kind of, oh, her pulse ox is changing, and things like that, where I thought, we're really accomplishing something here. This is real medicine.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure you would have had your oils in the room as well.
Oh, it got to be the point where there was, I think the top cardiologist we were working with there was his name was Dr. Charbonneau. And in wards like that, the doctors are doing the best work they can, but people die every day.
Yeah.
And he would come doing his morning rounds, and he would walk into my mother's room, kind of walk in, see my father and I there, and he'd say, sort of go, "Well, how are we doing this morning?" And he'd walk over and lightly put his hands on the rails of my mother's bed and look down and take a deep, full in breath, just kind of, and then look up and with a little smile on his face, "So how are we all doing this morning?" Because it made his morning, just in his stressful day, to walk into the room,
right?
Because it just calmed him down.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we got to the day where she was failing badly, and the antibiotics weren't working, either orally or intravenously, and I had to pull him aside and explain why and how I had a better way. Mm-hmm. And because of my background studying physiology and anatomy and organic chemistry, I could lay all that material on him in a way that he understood. And so almost immediately, he just, when the rest of the crew was doing their morning rounds, he just kind of went, "Hey everybody, Blaine's going to be part of the team now." And they were all like, "What, really?" Mm-hmm. And he said, "Yes, we're going to let Blaine be part of the team. We're going to chart everything he does. And if the scents in the hallway are too strong, we'll just keep the room sealed. We'll keep the doors closed. And we're just going to track what he does." And I have no doubt in my mind that I saved my mother's life.
Yeah.
And watching her little white head coming up my front porch steps for a family dinner like Thanksgiving or something that got cut short, watching her little white head come up the steps was one of the best paydays I ever had.
Yeah.
To know that I'd saved my own mom.
Wow.
So, but we have to work together. Mm-hmm. So I've always said in classes, if we leave here tonight and I'm not paying attention and I walk out into the street and get hit by a bus, and I'm laying on the road there, and there's blood coming out of my ears, and I'm unconscious, and you can see a bone sticking out of one of my legs right through my pants, please don't call a herbalist. Okay? Call 911. I need some professional standard practice help here. But once we get past a certain stage, then I can come in, like working with cancer patients. I've never been out there claiming that I treat cancer, but even oncologists that I know will work with me because they understand how toxic a lot of their chemotherapy drugs are, mm-hmm. and they understand how things like chlorella, for example, can help clean the body up once they're done with all of their stuff.
Right.
So we can work together. And so many people just don't get that opportunity.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. The
there
polarization.
There was some of my dog park friends, one of whom is an oncologist here in the city, and one of our top people, I think. He's on a lot of boards and things. He was one of the park circle. And we got this little English lady, a former bus driver for the city. And she had, I think it was breast cancer, and looked at what was going on out there and decided to go standard practice, which I didn't fault her for. And so we had a whole little team approach. And the oncologist and I have some mutual respect for each other. We're good friends. And so we had a whole little plan. And oh, I so wish I had a little video clip of this, where it was an autumn day and we're walking in the park with our dogs playing over there. And there's a few inches of leaves on the pathway and we're kicking up leaves. And she's walking with, on one arm, her oncologist, and on the other arm, her witch doctor.
Right.
You know, and we have a team. And why doesn't everybody get that opportunity?
Yeah.
You know, so I hope that I can keep inspiring that change. It's happening in other cities and other parts of, you know, I'm 68 now, and a lot of drugstores when I was a kid, more than half of their inventory was herbs.
Right.
And one by one, the herbs got replaced by synthetics. And so that lasted about a generation or so, because now we're in a position where a lot of drugstores are expanding to put in more herbs.
Yeah, it's true.
Because we're going back,
Yeah.
right? Through public pressure and greater knowledge. But so there's times when I need a 911 truck. That's happened to me a couple of times. And I'll say, you know, the EMS guys have a lot of good stuff in their truck that I don't have, but I've got some things in my little black bag that they don't have.
Yeah.
Let's work together.
Yeah.
And I've just always had that approach. And I think that's why it was a big part of my career growing, where even hospital boards were bringing me in to do staff trainings for various things. I remember some years ago getting a call from the director of the Medicine Hat main hospital there saying, Blaine, there's a few areas where we're not doing so well, really, like COPD, a lot of other things with respiratory problems, and a lot of endocrine gland problems too. And we hear that you're doing some nice work. What would it take to get you to Medicine Hat to do a staff training for our hospital?
Wow.
And you know, I just wouldn't have had opportunities like that if I was doing the whole flower child,
Right.
herbs are magic, and you know, all of that thing. We can work together.
Yeah.
And even some of the chemotherapy drugs are still directly plant-based.
Right.
I think, I forget the name, it's Taxol or something like that, or Thuzol. And it's made from ground cedar.
Right. Interesting.
And this was discovered in China, and people eliminating the herb there because it became such a good chemotherapy drug, there's almost none left. So they had, apparently there was almost people using shotguns to protect their secret places to go wildcrafting for the ground cedar.
Right.
You know, because we were having trouble keeping up with all of the wildcrafters. But synthetics and natural things both have their place. And I think things that come directly from the earth work more energy-wise, helpful for the body. But at times where things are really out of balance, we need things. You know, we need radiation at times, and those are the big steps. Or you break a leg, we put it in a cast. But some of the nutritional things you can take are going to help that bone heal a lot faster.
Yeah.
You know, there's things like silica. And a lot of people aren't told that in the clinic.
Right.
Or in the ER or whatever. So they have to go see. I think it's unfortunate that some level of, well, naturopaths, once they've done the same basic training as a GP, then they get to branch out and pick up. Are they going to work with, like I've had some clients of mine that were naturopaths work with oils.
Right.
Or that was their choice. You know, or they can work more with vitamins or whatever.
Homeopathy or,
Any of these categories. And like not that many years ago, we had doctors that were actually losing their medical license because they were choosing to work with. There was one in my hometown. In fact, I dated his daughter for a while. And they pulled his medical license because he was recommending vitamins.
Right. Wow.
And to me, that was just atrocious, right? And I think there's books about that now with, I had met somebody who he tracked several doctors and their experience. And one of them was the gentleman I'm talking about from my hometown. But I think in the years I've been working with herbs, I never wanted to be a herbalist. I never wanted to be an aromatherapist. I still don't even like that word. It sounds flaky. Like
Right.
we live in the redneck capital of the world, and between some of the standard practice negativity that I'm mentioning, or it just sounds too flaky.
Right.
You know, kind of like Reiki sounds flaky
Yeah.
to a lot of people, yet properly done, it's very real. And I'm not sure where they're at it, but I heard some years ago that the Vancouver General Hospital had added a whole new wing, and they found that people even doing open heart surgery were doing that much better in the surgical process and recovery time while they were getting Reiki even during surgery.
Wow.
You know, that things were going better, and woohoo!
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah, and
it's
imagine
about time.
If,
you know?
if the surgeon and the aides can all have that kind of mindset and
Yeah.
energetic, influence. Is that why
So-
you chose the term, phytotherapeutics? That's something like.
Yes, I preferred that. The only backfire is some people without an open mind ask if do I work on dogs? Am I some sort of vet? Because they just hear the word phytotherapy.
Right.
And he must work on dogs. No. Phyto is just Latin for plant.
Yeah.
So saying-
PHYTO, not
Yeah.
FIDO.
Right. So
Phyto.
phytotherapy includes flower essences and homeopathy and any type of herbal extract like tinctures or just a cup of tea.
Yeah. Oh, I like
You know,
that.
So it's working with plant medicines, and everywhere in the world there's something wrong or something scary like a poisonous snake or insects or whatever that are deadly. Like, I mean, in Australia we've got things like funnel web spiders that are lethal. They've finally got synthetic antivenoms now.
Right.
But for a long time they didn't. And what the Aboriginal people there used, I guess that's not even a proper word anymore, the indigenous people there used for years, was the crushed leaves of melaleuca trees.
Right.
And so if you've been bitten by a funnel web spider and you run screaming, you're going to die.
Right. You're just
But
moving all that through your system.
Going to another whole level, which is getting into all of this a little more spiritually, if you just stand there in front of the tree and ask for guidance, you may be fortunate and believe in that. You may be fortunate enough to be guided to just crush up some of the leaves on the tree. Wait a minute. The leaves from this tree, the one with the spiders in it? Are you kidding me? That's just goofy.
Right.
You know? But that's the way it works sometimes. You know? You
Yeah.
just, if you stop and run, you're in trouble.
Right.
And we've become an age where so much of what I've taught in simple courses like Herb 1 was in grade 8 science. But people forget stuff like that. You know?
Yeah.
I had a gentleman, I've done a lot of classes at teachers' conventions, and I think the topic that day was herbal medicinal uses of things you already own. They're in their kitchen cupboard. You're in your kitchen
Right.
cupboard.
Yeah.
And my room was overfull. It was like standing room only. And I had a couple of people, when it was over, we went over into the lunch hour and nobody left. And a few people came up to me and said, Blaine, teachers don't do this, like sit still for that long.
Right.
And you held the room for that long and even cut into their lunch break like that. Teachers just don't do that. And one gentleman came up to me and he said, excuse me, I'm a grade 8 science teacher, and most of what was in you had these people laughing and writing things down and taking notes and everything, and most of what you covered this morning is in my agenda.
Right.
And you made me realize I'm a lousy teacher.
Right.
Because he said, science is fun. And I said, yes, it's really fun. And he was missing the point. I said, well, then why did you become a science teacher? But it was one of my biggest compliments of my career to have this science teacher come up and say, can I use some of your lines?
Yeah.
You know, I said, all of them. You know, spread the word. Help me spread the word. You know, so.
Yeah, you really introduced me to the concept that, your spice cabinet is your medicine cabinet, in that sense. And, oftentimes, as I was getting into herbs, we can glamorize things like ginseng or whatever, and it's like, oregano's pretty darn good too,
Yeah.
Yeah, cayenne, cinnamon.
Tea bags.
Tea bags, right?
Most people have some brown or black tea in their home.
Right.
And if you've slipped with a kitchen knife and have a really deep cut, sort of like the first thing you want to do if you burn yourself on an oven rack is just get the cold water running.
Right.
And then worry about, do we have some aloe vera around or lavender oil or whatever.
Yeah.
But just
Draw that
get
heat.
the cold on it right
Yeah.
away as fast as you can so that the heat doesn't penetrate anymore. So get the cold water on, grab an ice cube, whatever you can do, and then think about what else you've got. But if you've cut yourself badly, moisten a couple of tea bags and put them directly on the cut, and the tannic acids in the tea will stop the bleeding.
Right.
And where did I learn that?
Experience?
Yeah, when I was 6 years old and had a tooth pulled.
Oh.
And the bleeding wasn't stopping.
Right.
And my mother was worried and called the dentist. And the dentist, that's why I hated brown black tea for years, most of my life. I couldn't take the taste anymore because when I was that young, I had to suck on a tea bag all afternoon. But I remember that, right?
Yeah.
And right away, the blood was clotting, and I had a mouthful of blood jelly.
Right.
But it worked.
Yeah.
So there's a dentist that was thinking holistically.
Yeah.
But it works, and most people don't realize that.
Yeah.
That even something like a simple tea bag
Right.
can be that good on it. Big slash. Put 3 of them on there. Pour a little warm water on it. Get them moist.
Yeah.
Put it on with a bandage of some sort, and yeah, maybe you don't even need stitches.
Right. Amazing.
So there's so much you can do with what you already own, and people have just lost touch.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of forces at work at this kind of like big topic that we're talking about. How modern medicine, big pharma, shall we call it? Like its roots go way back in terms of trying to kind of suppress, and we could even look to the church that might have seen a threat to things that were superstitious or earth-based. So we have all that generationally. And, kind of even in kind of a modernization, industrialization, I can see how it has happened, and I can see it in, other cultures, like, traveling to Ecuador or something like that. Like, for those people, they really want to, elevate and progress and modernize. And unfortunately, in that, they'll look at kind of, those simple kind of folk remedies or traditions as backwards, right? And they'll leave it for the kind of what they perceive as the more modern and advanced, like from quinoa to Coca-Cola, right? Because that's a sign of progress, or the simplicity, and even our own culture of like, tea bags, this, that, it's like, where's the modern science? Where's the, and that's great. It's got a place, but it's about harmonizing and bringing those two together. I love the idea of folk medicine and its accessibility, its practicality of everyday and people's empowerment. I think that's really, unfortunately, just sometimes how we learn as humans, right? We got to go all the way over here. We go, oh, wait a minute, and then we go all the way back over here. It's that middle path that's so darn hard to walk.
Yes. Yeah, and we missed it. But it's been a short, people think it's a fad or a trend or something, but it's only been 2 generations where we got off natural medicines and one by one replaced them with drugs. Even some of the students I've had where it's a family-run drugstore that Grandpa opened. Right. And it was 80% herbal tinctures and things when he opened it. And then, well, his son ran it. That's when, so we have something like valerian root, which is a really good, guess what, things grounding, roots in the ground, roots are grounding, duh. And but we have to take, and Big Pharma, as you mentioned, have scouts all over the world looking for new plants that they can make drugs from, because God, or whoever you want to thank, owns the patent to the plant, okay? But if you can pull something like one active agent out of it, then you can patent that. So you take a plant that's got 236 chemical components, but you're looking like they do these high pressure liquid chromatography and gas chromatograms and things, and you look at all the little peaks and, oh, what's this one? That must be what makes it a sedative. Can we fake that? Can we make that? Yes, we can. Oh, well, then we'll call it, it was valerian, let's make it, give them some clues here, we'll call it Valium. Oh, okay. And then, after a lot of expensive research and development costs, you end up with little pills that are not really worth much, but you have to offset all of your R&D. But When you look at something, I think geranium for me is an example with working with oils. There's something like 236 components in that oil.
Wow.
And the big ones are stuff like linalool, which is in lavender, and linalool acetate. When an acid and an alcohol hold hands, it becomes an ester, and anything that ends with ATE, like linalool acetate, any ATE things are calming and sedating. So that's what makes lavender sleepy time. You put some on your pillow or whatever, is the ester,
Right.
but it's the alcohol that helps wounds heal. So those are two big peaks on
Yeah.
the lavender chart. But when you take one chemical out of the plant, there's all these little people that help balance this thing,
Right.
so that you avoid the side effects. But when you make one thing really pure, all of those buffers, let's call them, are missing.
Right.
And that's part of why we have side effects to so many herbs.
Yeah.
So but the prescription process is more reliable because plant medicines vary a lot depending on the weather,
Right.
just like a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
You may be at a dinner party, have some wine there that you really, really enjoy, and you go buy some, and it's just, this is crap. But if you could talk to the people or whatever, the one you bought was a different year.
Right. Yeah. There's all those
Or
variabilities.
a different vineyard or something. And so the products vary a lot. I remember from reading, it was a book on wine, and I was finding out that a lot of people ask me about organic herbs. They're not always better.
Right.
Sometimes they are,
Yeah.
but not always. We had, it came up at a big conference that I was part of in San Francisco. We had some growers there on one of the panels, and they were explaining that all our best peppermint on this continent comes from that whole Oregon area. And they explained that this man very kindly, he was appreciative and said, listen, we appreciate that a lot of you are willing to spend a little more money to get organic products. I have children and I have pets, and I don't want to use herbicides and pesticides. They're expensive.
Right.
And I'm raising a family on the vineyard or on the orchard or whatever.
Yeah.
But sometimes we get infections come in, and if we don't spray the plants, we're going to lose our whole crop. So we follow the directions carefully and make sure they're used at the proper temperature and weather and after a rain or before a rain and all that sort of thing. We can test the plants and realize they're actually okay. So he said, this year, our regular peppermint oil that we sell to companies like Wrigley's for their chewing gum and everything else is just fine, food grade, no problem. FCC, federally certified, Codex approved peppermint oil for oral use, put it in candy, is just fine. But the organic peppermint that we grew, when it got exposed to this fungus, had to fight back itself.
Right.
And how it fought back was to start generating a whole bunch of ketones, which are actually quite toxic. And if you smell this peppermint, instead of waking you up, it's going to give you a headache. And our organic peppermint wouldn't even make food grade because of those chemicals,
Wow.
which the plant was using to defend itself.
Right.
So organics aren't always better, mostly so. And I'm certainly part of the movement, but not always so.
Yeah.
And even for your business, like I was thinking of you when I found some organic spearmint.
Right.
God, it tasted horrible.
Oh no.
And the regular spearmint that we get, again, like the peppermint story, is very affordable. It's got nice flavor and everything else. I don't know, I might have even just thrown it out.
Right.
Because this organic one that I tried was just horrible.
Yeah.
Who would eat a chocolate that tasted like that,
Right.
And yet with our organic orange, it's not much pricier, but it tastes way better than a regular orange people. And there again is a thing that people without the training seem to think that essential oil of orange is going to be this really strong orange flavor. Well, no, because it's made from orange rinds.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, certainly chefs, but a lot of people at home learn to use a zester for certain dishes. I know when I make my own cranberry sauce, I'm doing with organic citrus fruits, I'm using the zester to scrape the rinds off the lemons and oranges because they add to the flavor and it's not quite so sweet.
Right.
From all the brown sugar or whatever went into the sauce. So in the case of the orange oil that we have, and again, I was thinking of you, the orange oil that's organic in the chocolate tastes way better than the regular one, even though the regular one is food grade.
Right.
But it's bitter.
Yeah.
So, and every year, every season, the same oil or dried herb or tincture or whatever that you got from the same source last year may not be technically as good for healing or taste different or whatever than last year's as this year's. Mm-hmm. And that's where the synthetics come in on top, because when they do things synthetically, they're always the same.
They can dial it specifically.
Yeah. So fragrances like Chanel No. 5 started out with, and a lot of perfumes still have organic components, but to get over that, as the petrochemical industry was burgeoning back in the late 1800s, and they started realizing they could take this stuff out of that flower and make it fake, and it would always be the same.
Right.
So whether you buy Chanel No. 5 at the Bay in Winnipeg or any store anywhere in the country, it always smells the same.
Right.
And people like that. They like the same.
Yeah.
Right. As growing up Austrian and Ukrainian, I love making dill pickles and sauerkraut, things like that. They've been part of my whole life. But I have to admit that from year to year, my dill pickles taste just a little different.
Right.
Because I'm not measuring things that closely. And when you stuff all the dill seeds in the top of the jar, I don't know anybody that weighs those in micrograms. You just stuff a bunch in the top of the jar.
Yeah.
So each jar tastes just a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I think that's nice.
Totally.
Because it gives you some variety.
For sure.
But if you're buying a product at Safeway, you want it to taste the same as the tartar sauce you bought last week or whatever.
Yeah.
So it all fits in with commercialism and so forth. But
yeah, it's a real, I get it. Like the world is full of duality. There's always, neither is inherently good or bad. This kind of desire for standardization, consistency. There's a time and a place for that.
We need them both.
Yeah, and yet I like you as well. I really appreciate the variation, and there's subtlety, there's nuance, and chocolate is a really good example of that, where chocolate has been produced to be this kind of standardized, homogenized, dark chocolate, like brownie kind of a flavor. Whereas if you really start exploring the beans, you can get things that have like red fruit notes, or some of them have more, nuts or, roasted. I mean, it's actually got 3 times more flavor compounds than wine. Right. And I know, you've got a palate for wine, and exploring that whole range of everything, like chocolate's just that much more depth. Yet most people have no idea, because all they've had is kind of the standardized chocolate bar in that regard. There's a few ways we can take this conversation. As you were speaking, I'm thinking about the complexity of plant chemistry, right? And I was thinking of our mutual friend and one of your students, Yarrow Willard. And how he thinks about
what does he call himself now? The Jedi,
the herbal Jedi.
Herbal Jedi.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah,
I'm so proud of Yarrow.
Yeah, he's doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, he'll think about, herbal blends in the sense of like a tribe. You've got your chief, and you've got each of these different roles. And as you were talking about the plant chemistry, I was thinking about, okay, there's those that, the spike, the big, chemical components, but there's all those other little, smaller subtle pieces that are a part of the orchestra. Choose your analogy, right? Like they all play a role in creating a certain effect. And then I started thinking of Stephen Herod Buhner and this idea of, he would even like to move away from the idea that, okay, this plant does this, this, and this. He says, meet it anew, right? Interact with it as a living being. It's like meeting another person. If we meet our mutual friend Denis Manzer, we'll see him like, oh yeah, seems like a really good guy. He's a herbalist. He's this, he's that. And you get a surface level impression, and we can say, yeah, that's Denis. but there's obviously so much more depth to
Right.
who he is as there is
all of us.
every other person, right? And he might show you that side of him that's like, oh, he's got a political science degree, and like there's another element, and I believe plants are exactly the same way. And yes, there's the learning of plant medicine and herbalism from kind of, standardized, like, yes, valerian is, has these types of compounds and it does this. But have you experienced, do you have, stories about plants that have kind of revealed a different individual character in that moment to you, working with them more intimately, individually, and instead of kind of confining them to, it does this, and whatever those factors are, right? Like you say, it could have been the year, it could have been just that moment, that interaction. Can plants respond? Can they change their chemistry in aid of humans?
I have long felt as an amateur chef that if you're really cranky and have some friends coming for dinner, you shouldn't be cooking.
Right, yeah.
You have to be working. And anybody that's ever been one of my helpers on our opening day, I've always said, what's really important here is that we have fun doing this. And at times when people have complimented us with saying that our oils are better than others that they've tried, and so what's the secret, or where do you get your product, or whatever, I say, well, we have fun, and we're smiling and laughing when we fill every little bottle.
That's it.
And that little spin on things, like I was sad, but realizing that they're getting older and had to retire. There was a family I was getting, especially my organic lamb from, and eggs and chickens and things. They went into the lamb's red meat, but, and every time I saw them, they'd come with a delivery every couple of weeks, and some of my neighbors got in on it, and we'd have a hug at the door and laugh and whatever. And that's the sort of energy you just don't get at a supermarket. Mm-hmm. You don't get hugs and kisses at Safeway. I mean, I'm not dumping on Safeway here, but just in general. Right?
Yeah.
Energetics of things. When somebody's helping me out in the foothills, pick arnica flowers, for example, and before we leave the truck, I kind of go, look, I hope we have a good day, but don't think about what you're getting paid for being here or anything like that, or what the product sells for. Concentrate on battered women, Olympic athletes. That's why we're making arnica cream for, like one of my biggest clients was one of the battered women's shelters.
Right.
And that makes me sad, but that I'm helping makes me happy.
Yeah, totally.
And arnica is one of those plants that they don't have in an EMS vehicle. Mm-hmm. And although some people buy it, like if you say had a skiing accident and fell into a tree or whatever, and you have about a bruise as big as your bottom, and go to a health food store a week later, it'll still help some, but where it should really be used is within 5 minutes after hitting the tree.
Right.
You should really have it there. This is kind of a funny story to share. I had, for quite a while there, I'd be teaching Herb 1 in this classroom, and right next door could be Terry himself or somebody else teaching Herb 2 in the room next door. And one evening, one of my Herb 1 students, good little student, took all of her notes, and in her little fanny pack skiing, she had a little vial of arnica tincture, and probably mine, mm-hmm. and she wiped out, I don't know if it was snowboarding or skiing, and went into a tree. And right there on the slope, she just dropped her ski suit and got the arnica out and was rubbing it into her knee. And so that night, we were just about ready to start class, and she came running up the aisle saying, Blaine, I have to show you this. And she was very pretty, and she was hiking her dress up right over her face, like panties and all. Yeah. And my students were like, well, what's going on here? Is it Blaine's birthday or something? And she said, I got to show you this. And you could see almost like brush marks where she hit her knee, so she put the arnica on her knee, right? But a lot of that impact transfers all the way up into your hip and all the way down to your toes.
Right.
And she should have done the whole area, right? So you could see like her knee was almost colorless, but her ankles were purple.
Right.
And, you know, all the way up to her hip was black and blue. And you could just see it, like from her fingers, almost like brush strokes,
Yeah.
where she put it on.
Right.
You know, and but it's a funny story, right?
Yeah.
With the whole.
So what year did you start teaching then? How did that all begin?
Well, I never wanted to be a teacher or a public speaker or a practitioner or to do any of this.
Yeah. I mean, you had a
but
background in the beauty industry, and then it was
I
photography.
I did the whole thing that was. It started out with being it was my first big trip. In fact, I've just finished finally 40 years later the book about me running off to live in the wilderness for a while. Mm-hmm. And I started at minus 27 in 4.5 feet of snow.
Right.
And
wow.
I lived there for 4.5 months. And when I came out, I just wanted to learn more. I wanted to do more of that. And I realized I had to learn more about, like, first aid by real definition is what to do until the doctor's coming.
Right.
But what about when you're on a kayak trip or whatever, and you're way up in the bush, you're 200 miles from the nearest road, and you're injured, and there's nobody coming. Mm-hmm. There's nobody to call. If it's really extreme and you're in phone range, if you even have a phone or anything like that, maybe you can get a helicopter, you know, changing days, right? But I wanted to learn more. And I was giggling when we brought Yarrow up, because I met Yarrow when he was still in his mother's belly.
Right.
I did some almost nude photographs of Dorothy, who's one of my soulmates, really, and wanted some pictures done. So I met Yarrow when he was still in utero. And then the other day when I was going through some old slides looking for pictures to put in this book that I just finished, I have, there's a picture of Terry on a herb walk, and I think he's holding up some meadow rue, kind of pointing at it. And just out of focus a bit behind him is Dorothy holding Yarrow.
Oh.
And he's, how old's your son?
He's almost 4 now. Mine.
Okay, well, he'd be younger than that. So
yeah.
it's like little baby Yarrow being held up.
Right.
And he's kind of staring at his dad holding this plant.
Yeah.
And I just, I mean, that's almost in his DNA,
yeah.
growing up in that culture, right? But
totally.
Yeah, how far we come. But anyway, back to your question.
So it's more than 40 years.
Yeah, and something came up one day where there was a class at SAIT.
Right.
That's where it all started. And it was, I think, a 6 or 8 evening class, just one night a week, on edible medicinal plants. And what had happened was it was sold out, and the instructor got a better offer from Outward Bound and ended up going to Ontario to take this course thing for them, and it was like more fun and more money.
Right, yeah.
And it was sold out, and somebody on the board had heard of Terry. He'd started the college by then, and he said, I thank you for calling, but I'm booked already, but I have a colleague, which at that point was a total stretch, a colleague that I think could handle this for you. And he phoned me and started telling me all about this class. And I was just wide-eyed thinking, wow, this sounds great, I hope I can come. And Terry said, well, so do I, because I just booked you as the instructor. And I was just like, no. And he said, look, I'll come on opening night. He said, you have to understand that a lot of people will teach stuff like this with no experience at all. They just read books.
Yeah.
And you've been out there, you've lived off the land, you know some of these plants intimately, and I think you're capable of the job. So I hesitantly agreed. Mm-hmm. And people talk. And pretty soon I had another class over there and another thing over there. And
yeah.
with this, like, people like even Shell Oil or whatever do these lunch hour. Some of them they just pay me and it's free for the staff, or some of them, the staff has to put $5 in a hat or whatever. People do different things. So I've taught at City Hall and
right.
for some big companies downtown. And I usually let them, when we put the word out, I'll let them write down topics they want to hear about.
Right.
So it could be headaches, PMS, whatever, mm-hmm. to make sure that I'm up to par, and I bring samples of different things. And I know when my first wife worked at, what was it called in Kensington? We ended up with 3 stores. Who had a herb store just off 10th Street on Kensington Road.
Oh,
Village something warehouse, Vitamin Warehouse maybe?
Vitamin Warehouse. Okay.
And so they ended up, we had a thing going where they set me up with an account, so it was in the computer. And when I was doing the breakfast show, I would go down there and I'd sign out props, basically, for the show.
Yeah.
And so while I'm talking about something with Dave Kelly, the B-Cam, they called it, would be doing a slow pan of the products that are available, right?
Yeah.
And then I'd just take them back and they would recredit my account, and so that worked out for me. And I'd have a little card there, so the store got a plug and blah, blah, blah. But for a while there, I was seeing 8 to 10 audiences a week.
Wow.
Between ongoing classes and one-nighters and things like that. And
Yeah.
I mean, my absolute best, highest, oh my gosh, thing that I had to do with, it started with Ray Dunphy, who's gone from us now. She died a few years ago. Used to bring in some quality speakers from Europe and from the States. And I had I was just getting really keen on oils, and would go to all of these classes. So at one of them, there's a school called Pacific Institute of Aromatherapy in San Rafael, California. And this guy he'd be teaching, his name's Kurt Schnabelt, and he'd be teaching, and then he'd sort of throw a question to the crowd. And I didn't want to be kind of showing off or whatever, but nobody else is responding. So I was answering questions. And one of them, he had a question about, I think it was Melissa, and I threw out a very precise answer. And he turned around and looked at me almost with this, how could you actually know that?
Right.
Sort of look. So the next year, every second year, he used to do this big workshop where he had some of the biggest names. I mean, here's the agenda for the weekend, and it's like Professor so-and-so from countries all over the world, but everybody there was PhDs and 3 books and like that. And I was on that list, and it was like, and Blaine who?
Right.
From where?
A phyto what?
Saskatchewan, like Alberta, like don't they wear snowshoes in the summer there?
Yeah.
And stuff. But it was a really big deal that I held my own.
Yeah.
With that level of crowd. And I learned that as being one of the instructors, we'd have dinners together and stuff, and I learned right away that getting that level of exposure to people that might have written 3 books already, what they admit to on stage while they're being recorded, and what they might say after a nice meal with 2 bottles of wine are completely different things. And they'd open up with this, that last book I wrote, man, chapters 6 and 7, what a crock of hooey that is. I didn't even know what I was talking about. So we had a guy, I think it was when Michael Scholes came in from England, and same thing, on opening morning, so we had people from all over Canada were there. Ray had filled the room, nice setup, and I still thank her for all that work she used to do. I hope she hears me from wherever it is. But people were asking questions, and he was sort of half answering, or I had something to add. And by tea break on the first day, the techs came over and gave me my own mic.
Right.
Because they got tired of passing this microphone around.
Yeah. And
so we were having lunch together on about the 3rd day. And Michael said, Blaine, according to the agenda, tomorrow morning's all about aromachemisry. And I hear you really got that down, and I don't really understand this at all. Like, it's one of the chapters in a lot of aromatherapy books that, because the instructor didn't understand it, that's why it's written so poorly, because they didn't understand it.
Right. And
so often, Paul quotes Betty, quoted Bill, quoted Nancy, and there's just so much bad information about aromachemisry. So anyway, he said, would you mind just taking tomorrow's class? I'm just going to sit in the back corner and see what I can learn. So, and a few people were surprised, but I mean, I was an attendee.
Right.
Anyway, but those were the levels I was going through.
Yeah.
So Kurt called one day, the phone rang, and one of his head assistants was asking how I would feel about coming down to to San Francisco, right in Fisherman's Wharf, to be part of this conference. And I got paid all expenses to go to San Francisco for a week, and for a 45-minute presentation got $1,000 US.
Amazing.
And I just
back at that time, that's
and one of the women on the staff said, could we get you back anytime soon? And I just turned around without hesitation and said, do you need anybody full time?
Right.
Like at rates like this.
Yeah.
I think I photocopied that check before I even cashed it, you know.
Right.
And I was saying, wow, look what but I mean, we're around town, I might be getting paid $50 an hour or something, you know, for teaching.
Yeah.
And so that was a real turning point for me. And anybody that would come to Calgary, the word went out amongst all the international speakers that if you're ever working in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, make sure you meet this Blaine guy, and try and get invited to his place for dinner.
Right.
And I'd have this whole mostly organic spread laid out, and I would learn more from any of those speakers after dinner than I ever would on the stage.
Right. Yeah.
Because they were more candid.
Yeah.
So one thing led to another, and it just slowly took over my life.
Yeah.
It was something I never wanted to do. It started out with just me living alone in the woods by myself.
Right.
I left the city as a frustrated young man. Working for a living wasn't making sense, and I just wanted to run away. And I ended up spending 4.5 months there. When I left, parting with, like, we took some gear in a 14-foot canoe as a sled behind a snowmobile, and my brother got me in, and we weren't sure when he left me there that day if I'd ever see him again.
Right.
You know, he admitted to me later that he wasn't sure if he should just turn the machine around and come and cold cock me and throw me on the back of the sled and take me home, you know.
Yeah.
But
and how old were you then? What age was that?
18.
18. Wow.
Yeah. And it's funny, where there's a photograph from that'll be on the cover of my book soon, where people have been over picking up an order for, when I was in photography, it could have been prints, or as my career in the herbal business grew, it could have been somebody, like a man picking up an order for his wife or whatever, and he's doing his shoes, and he'd look up and say, what is the significance of this photograph here?
Right.
And I'd say, well, that was me living alone in the woods when I was 18, or he'd say, and how old were you? I said, 18. And he'd say, I got an 18-year-old at home probably sitting on the couch playing video games, and he doesn't even know how to boil potatoes.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but that's where it all started.
Yeah.
And knowledge is an incredible thing, and never mind what you get paid. My biggest paydays, I mentioned one earlier about my mother, but saving a life is an incredible feeling.
Yeah.
You know, it's just,
Yeah.
there's nothing more spiritual than that, than
Right.
actually saving a life,
Yeah.
or even just an extreme disability.
Right.
You know, one of my students called, this is a couple of years ago, and she was heading home out end of Bow Trail, up into the hills there a little bit, and there was a bunch of road widening going on there. And she was driving along, and there was one of those big steamroller things they use for flattening out the pavement, you know. And as she was driving, she kind of looked at the speed she was doing, because the roller thing was going faster than she was, and she didn't think they could go that fast.
Right.
And they can't.
No.
His brakes failed.
Oh.
And he was just, suddenly he was looking at something, and there was one of those big drops there, and he lost focus for a minute and went over the drop and flipped the machine, and it had severed, I think, one of his legs right off.
Wow.
And she pulled over right away and looked in her trunk and had a little had a little first aid kit, and you know, just, anyway, she phoned me to say that she felt embarrassed that she didn't do more. I said, what did you do? And she said, I called 911, and I said, great, and you went to him with some rescue remedy, great, and you stayed with him, perfect. And, you know, because I remember once on 11th Avenue that happened, where I was sitting in, it's where 3 lanes becomes 5 lanes at rush hour. And there was a guy walking home with his lunch bucket, kind of dressed like he was a drywaller or something. And there was a bunch of high school kids zooming up what are normally parking lanes. And I was writing some notes down for my responsibility as a sales rep. And just a flash of light made me look up just in time that I watched this guy get clipped by a bunch of teenagers in a speeding car. And he flipped right over, cracked his head on it took out his legs just like a deer would on the highway, cracked his head off the windshield and went spinning up onto the curb.
Right.
So I put my four-wheel drive up on the curb, called it in. Or no, I didn't have a cell phone back then. I looked at, there was a shopkeeper going, oh my God, because she heard the brakes squeaking and stuff. And I just went like this, and she said, yeah, she's already calling an ambulance.
Yeah.
And this guy's conscious, and I'd grabbed my first aid kit, just get my rescue remedy out. And I just, he had sort of come to rest up against a tree, and was back up against a tree. And I'm thinking, his spine's probably fractured.
Right.
His leg's broken for sure. And there's blood running down his face from where his skull cracked the windshield. And I thought, like, there's nothing more important, nothing at all more important than something that we just, it's that old Sally, just take a deep breath, would you?
Right.
You know? When you walk into a crisis, or you're going to, the best thing that you can do just before you walk in is take a really deep breath, maybe two, because it's the only off button that you have for the whole stress response.
Right.
And just like your voice, it's always with you. You take a deep breath, and I sat down beside him and said, hi. My name's Blaine. How you feeling? A little wonky. Yeah, well, you just got clipped by a car, and I saw everything that happened, and I'm just going to put one of my business cards in your shirt pocket here. If this comes down to any sort of legal anything, I can be a witness. You bounced right in front of me. And but I'm just going to, Paul, can you hear that siren coming in the background there? Well, that's coming for you. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to sit here and talk to you for a while until the EMS vehicle gets here. I'm wondering, Paul, can you wiggle your toes for me? And he looked a little confused, and I looked down, and I could see his toes were wiggling in his running shoes. And I said, Paul, that's great. Thank you. So I was worried that you might have, because I shouldn't touch him.
Yeah,
He's probably got a spinal injury.
Yeah.
And I was worried you might have spinal damage, but if you can wiggle your toes, you're going to be okay. And I just sat with them for a minute until they came.
Right.
And just kept them calm. And I said, you might taste some blood in a minute, because there's some blood running down your face, but don't worry about that. It looks no big deal. They'll fix you up. And just sat with them for a while. But going back to the other story, I said, what did you do? And she looked in her first aid kit and thinking, this guy's got a severed leg. What am I going to do with my little first aid kit?
Yeah.
So I said, you didn't have the tools, but you might have remembered what I taught you about where the femoral artery is.
Right.
And instead of going for a tourniquet, which can be hazardous, but when you know where your arteries are, like it's right here under the muscle.
Yeah.
Like if I hold that right now with my thumb for about a minute, your fingers are going to go numb.
Yeah.
And just we studied all that. Remember in class, it's important to remember where the pipes are, because you could have done that. Mm-hmm. Would you mind me touching you, sir? And now there's a thing called the Good Samaritan Act that actually covers you if there's nobody better around. If having been trained, like for doing courses with the city, mm-hmm. You have to have your CPR and all of that trained. And one day we had almost all of the group for the retrainings. We all knew each other, and we'd all been through this 3 times kind of thing. And so the instructor said, I think I'm just going to get, you guys want to do an AED run? And we all kind of went, yeah. And I realized that using an AED is about as tough as using a POS terminal in a store.
Right.
Like it self-guides you. You can't do anything wrong. You put up some leads, and And if it would be wrong to give them the you know,
Right.
the spark, it won't run. It won't work. Like
Oh,
as soon as you
interesting.
put the leads on,
Yeah,
it knows
yeah.
what's going on. And there's AEDs now at golf courses and hotels and all over the place. So I'm not going to jump in and be the superhero.
Yeah.
But if there's nobody else around to,
Yeah.
I will. You know, and little things that we could be walking, just you and I or a couple of other people with us, like on a herb walk or something, and somebody might just turn around and say, "What's that, Bob?" And not see a root on the trail and trip and fall off the trail, and there's a dead tree there with some sticks coming out of it.
Yeah.
And one of them goes right into his chest, punctures a lung,
Yeah.
you know, and EMS generally doesn't come up a trail. You got to get this person back to the parking lot.
Right.
So one of my favorite things to do, and I've had to do this a few times over the years, is you might even get it from somebody whose lunch is in the Ziploc bag. But, and I love you take a piece of duct tape, you take a roll of duct tape, and then can you see my mic?
Yeah.
So we'd pull out, I'd stand back from you and roll out about at least 6 feet, and you fold it on itself initially just to get it not stick, and then you very slowly, keeping tension, roll it on itself again and again. So you end up with a thing about the size of the mic, or a condom, or a book of matches.
Yeah.
And just stash those everywhere. Have them in your purse, in your glove box, in your fishing tackle box. Just have them everywhere, because it's waterproof.
Right.
And the adhesive works even in the rain.
Yeah.
Like I've used duct tape so many times for a quick slash in the canoe with a filleting knife, and I got a really good first aid kit, but it's pouring rain and I just get the duct tape on it, and then when we get to camp, I'll put a proper dressing on it. You know? So I said, you stayed with him, you kept him calm, you knew that EMS was coming.
Yeah.
You could have remembered where that artery was, but it's okay that you forgot. And I just assured her that he could have gone into shock, but you stayed with him and kept him conscious.
Yeah.
And that was the most important thing you could do. So don't be embarrassed. You helped him a lot.
Yeah.
You know, there's all those little things that just remembering how to keep somebody calm in an accident scene.
Yeah.
If you're going to go be a helper, you can't go like that. You have to. Where can I start? Like in standard practice, it's called triaging.
Right.
Where you look at all the people that fell out of the bushcrafts. That guy over there is bleeding fast with 2 severed legs. I can't help him. But this lady over here has some deep tissue injuries, and you've got a little basic first aid kit. I'm going to get you helping her. But there's a woman over there, I can see it almost like an aura from here, is going into deep shock, and she may actually need more help than the guy who's bleeding out over here.
Right.
I'm going to go make sure she's okay.
Yeah, and both those stories remind me of, you know, kind of where we started the idea of Reiki, and, you know, whatever that is to anybody, you know, watching, you know, to me it's about presence, it's about energy, it's about intention. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's foundational. And don't you think as a herbalist and, you know, your time in the woods, like, isn't that kind of a foundational training? Like nature, if you can really tune in to nature, kind of, it cultivates that presence.
And you see things when you have time to just be relaxed enough that you might be sitting there having your lunch, and you noticed on the hillside that you're sitting on that a tree broke or a branch fell off a tree or whatever, and it fell over there. And so the first fall that happened, some leaves blew in along the thing laying on the ground there, and then you ended up with some mulch over time, and a bit of compost happened, and now there's little plants coming up. And it must be something like that people watched when they started doing terraced farming in Asia, that do rice paddies that way, and South America as well. You know, you see all these terraced farms up the hillside. Somebody just thought about something they witnessed that happened naturally.
Yeah.
And nature, that's what engineering
Yeah.
all comes from nature too.
Yeah, the idea of biomimicry, some of the greatest technologies,
Yeah.
helicopters, you name it, right? It's all
Sure.
through an observation of nature.
I was just watching for the third time part of Dune last night, and love those, what do they call them, ornithopters or something they had in the movie Dune,
Right.
where they look like big dragonflies.
Yeah, yeah,
It's so cool.
yeah. Cool. Well, I want
We're
to.
about out of time.
Well, I want to bring this kind of full circle. You know,
Okay.
we started with your, the last couple of years. Like, where have you been?
It's been 2.5 years soon
Yeah.
that I've
and-
been missing in action completely.
And I want to lead in with, we've talked a lot about your life, and for those that are watching, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, we're going to do a couple more of these conversations. Blaine has a lot of stories to share, a lot of wisdom to share, and excited to kind of, provide a space and pull that out.
I miss teaching so much. And,
So we're going to do some live events with you as well, and I'm really excited.
Looking forward to that. It's interesting that in the hospital first and now in the home care that I'm in, the people that I make friends with fastest is the staff.
Right.
Because even nursing staff and whatnot will ask me questions about their sick kid at home.
Right.
And they're nurses already or whatever. And so I develop a friendship or a bond of some sort with the staff faster than the patients. And because you can't be pushy about anything. It's like religion.
Yeah,
You know, if you're pushy, you're just going to turn people off. So I've learned over the years to be a little careful about saying that, there's actually another way to do that if you're interested. I've done this before. And if people are herbal stuff and they almost make a cross and run away screaming, then don't chase them. Mm-hmm. They're not ready.
Yeah.
But if you, really, what sort of background do you have? And while we're doing it already, we're discussing my background, and it was just one step at a time.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to sell products, but I had a sales background. I worked for 16 years in the beauty industry selling hairdressers pretty much everything they needed, from perms and colors to scissors and capes and just all of it. And that's where the aroma thing happened. Was one of my former competitors, I guess, was at a conference somewhere in the States, and aromatherapy had come up.
Right.
And I ended up working for doing product launches for a company. It used to be the biggest distributor in America. It was called Aroma Vera.
Right.
A man named Marcel Levavre had come from Provence, and great nose, that man, and he was a good blender. And he started bringing things in from suppliers and distillers that he knew back home, and created this beautiful company. And so anyway, there was a couple of guys having lunch, guys and gals, and they were saying, okay, so it sounds like there's going to be a lot of chemistry involved here. Anybody heard from Blaine lately? And so we have to somehow get this herbal stuff into hairdresser brains. Anybody talked to Blaine lately? And half the people there were all wondering what I was doing.
Right.
So they called me in on the next lunch meeting to convince me to come in, and it was doing product launches. Like if a salon bought a certain amount of stuff, they got me for an evening. If they took this big $5,000 display, they got me for a weekend.
Right.
And that's what got me into teaching on a different level than I was with the wild plant story.
Yeah, yeah.
Two different experiences, but it's all fit together.
Yeah.
And all these years later, I ended up, most of my clients selling oils from coast to coast, from Prince Edward Island to Salt Spring Island, were practitioners, including fellow herbalists, but naturopaths, physiotherapists, massage therapists, occasionally a dentist, realizing that my oil blend is exactly the same as something like Ambisol, except it doesn't have the, I'm just forgetting the name of the chemical here that makes your tongue go numb, so you can't taste your lunch and you bite your tongue if you're not careful.
Right, like Novocaine? Or no, that's something different.
You said Novocaine?
Yeah.
It's not Novocaine, anyway, similar.
Right.
But the basics of even things like Dr. Lister was a young oral surgeon
Yeah.
who wanted to do some experimental work, and he was having problems because our mouths are so filthy. The people that he was doing oral surgery on were getting infections that were hard to handle. And he started thinking about these plant extracts, and if he could do irrigations, just having people, like today you could use some tea tree or some clove or whatever. And what was in first aid kits even when I was a little boy? You got a toothache. I remember the family would get out the medicine chest, and there'd be a little bottle of clove oil in there.
Right.
And so they're going to use the non-fire end of a wooden match or just a toothpick and dip it in the clove oil.
Right.
And somehow, as my mother's doing this, my father knew, don't get any on his lips, Mom, you know. And,
Yeah.
and that's still true today, that you don't want pure clove oil on your lips because it's going to burn. But what do you use? I mean, one of my favorite things to do is cotton balls and things like that debride in your mouth, and they get all, it's just sort of messy. But I like to use a piece of paper towel and actually cut it with scissors.
Right.
And fold it in four and soak that with, whether it's Ambisol or something like my blend, and put it right up in there in the gum where the problem is on that tooth. And then it won't get little bits of paper in your mouth with the cut paper towel. And a lot of people have told me they preferred using the oils to using something like Ambisol because it worked as well, but without the benzocaine. That's it.
Right, there you are.
With the benzocaine, you didn't get that whole all afternoon, right? So one or the other. Like I have Ambisol in my fishing tackle box,
Right.
because if I ever get a fish hook in the finger, I want the benzocaine.
Yeah.
You know, there's things that we need to have. If somebody in the group has an extreme reaction to something like a bee sting, you know, there's meds that you should have, as well as using some of the oils that I work with for things like insects or plant allergies are best used before exposure.
Right.
If you know you have a problem going into the granary or the anything like that, or certain herbs, maybe you're going to go out and mow the lawn and you see there's some weeds that are a little tall, and you always get sniffles and sneezes after you go mow the lawn when it's like that,
Right.
because of the pollen. You're best to use the oils before you go mow the lawn.
Right.
And what they're actually doing, things like basil and whatnot, are telling your white blood cells that blow up, and that's what causes the swelling. It sort of tells them to take the afternoon off.
Right.
So there's certain things like that have to be used. But anyway, the background in sales and the beauty industry, and it all started to fit together, and still is. Like some of my clients are hairdressers,
Right.
you know, not herbalists,
Yeah.
but I've had such a diverse background myself that it's all these pieces have fit together, and I'm really happy that obviously I'm even alive.
Yes.
Because that was a big deal, having a stroke, and realizing that I can still remember Latin names like Melaleuca quinquenervia viridiflora, which is a particular cousin to tea tree, and most people can't read that even if I write it down for them.
Yeah.
So I know that's there, and I can remember the Latin name for, I think I could go do a full weekend organic chemistry class tomorrow without using any notes. I think I'm remembering all my chemical names.
Yeah.
You know, and long-term memory is good. Short-term memory, not so good. I forget your son's name.
Yeah.
Just met him.
Right.
So, and that the neurologist predicted that. But it just feels good to be alive, and I'm eager to get back in the saddle, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, and I really want to thank you for helping me do things like this. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I know I've got fans out there,
Yeah, absolutely.
and we can make something work together, and I'm really looking forward to this. So,
Cool. Right on.
Thank you.
Woo-hoo. Cool. And thanks everybody for tuning in. It was a pleasure. Feel free, send us some questions. What would you like to hear from Blaine?
yeah, that's a good way to start. Just like I was saying, I used to do the things at City Hall.
Yeah.
What do you want to know about?
Yeah, what are the topics? What are the
I've been
areas?
thinking about doing a book called Aroma What, just because there's so many myths and things that is just wrong. You know, one of them, like, there's 20 books out there that say there's 20 drops in a mill, And whoever said that, and quoted who, and quoted who, and quoted who, because all the books say that. I've been looking for a dropper on an aromatherapy bottle for 35 years that gives 20 drops in a mil.
Right.
And even when I worked for Roma Vera that I brought up, even all of their corporate literature said there's 20 drops in a mil. Did anybody ever check? Like,
Apparently not.
is there some kind of dropper top somewhere with water or alcohol where there's 20 drops in a mil? Because I was making little vials for first aid kits with one of my blends where I was getting 165 drops in a 4 ml bottle. So I'm thinking, somebody's lying here or misinformed.
Right.
You know, it's more polite, I guess. But like I tell people, my students, if you ever witness 20 drops in a mil, call me, collect. I'll charter a helicopter just to get there and witness it. You know, so there's all sorts of little things like that where formulas are wrong, and you know we can help correct all of that. And that's, like I said, I'd rather be a teacher than a practitioner anyway.
Right.
The only reason I ended up being a practitioner was every time I did a talk, there'd be women grabbing my legs and said, I've got to bring you my husband or my dog or my daughter, whoever.
Yeah.
And I said, well, sorry, I don't see patients. Well, you have to.
Right.
You know? And so I didn't want to go into a clinic full time, but I didn't want to ever have somebody pull me over and like, what are you doing? And, you know, so I got my home business license with the city first, which is doable. They're hard. It's a bit strict when you want to be a massage therapist at home,
right?
Because they're worried about people being hookers,
right?
You know. But if you've got anything legitimate you want to do, like if I'm going to restore a '55 Chevy in my backyard, the neighbors have to put up with the noise and the fumes.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to do it professionally, no.
Yeah.
You need to get a business license, right?
Yeah.
So most of it's just common sense stuff.
For sure.
So you can be a practitioner at home. But anyway, that's where it all started with me seeing patients, and that led to some actual clinical part-time work in various places.
Yeah.
And without me even wanting to, it all took over my life, just one little step at a time.
And look at that. Look at the huge ripples. Look at the huge impact.
In fact, I love doing that at times when I'm opening a talk, and I'll just say, thank you for coming out this evening, everybody. You might have come with a friend or been convinced or heard something about me and think I know a lot about what I'm talking about, but I have to. And I always make this little scene where I shake my hand. I'll kind of go like this, and I'll shake my hand, and you know, I finally get to kind of going, sorry folks, but after over 40 years of doing this professionally, that's about how much I really know.
Yeah.
Because it's so vast.
Mm-hmm. But that's also the sign of a wise man.
And that's why I keep, every time I do a talk or do a class, I learn from the people in the room.
Yeah.
It may just be something about humanity, or it may be something literally about a mistake I made in my talk tonight or whatever. You know, but
Yeah.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the welcome back.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Till next time.
Sayonara, namaste.